So an article just posted, and once again, it's picked Florida as a top state for retirement. And so today's video, we're going to talk about that article. We're going to look at the criteria they used in selecting Florida. And we're also going to discuss some of the legal requirements that you should be aware of if you're thinking about retiring to Florida, or if in fact you're thinking of being just perhaps a Florida Snowbird. Hi, I'm Chuck Roulet. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in both Florida and in Minnesota. And we help our clients preserve, protect, and pass on their home and life savings through custom tailored planning. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and bell notification so you're alerted of any upcoming videos. And if you have a question on wills, trusts, healthcare directives, powers of attorney, estate taxes, and how to protect assets, or even relocating to Florida, post your question in the comments below. May answer that in an upcoming video. So let's pull the article up and take a peek here. So the article is the 10 best and worst states to retire in. And the article notes that, not surprisingly, the South and some Midwest states dominate the rankings. And the study was done by Bankrate. And they looked at several public and private data sets related to retirees and used that to determine where each state came in at. And they looked at affordability, overall well-being, the quality cost of healthcare, the weather, and crime. And here's how they rated those. So they weighted affordability as 40% of the total score, over well-being of people there at 25% of the score. The quality and cost of healthcare came in at 20% of the score. Weather came in at 10%, and crime came in at 5%. And interestingly enough, in their ratings, Iowa actually topped the ratings. So let's take a peek here at where they placed Florida. So in their rankings, they placed Florida the 8th best state for retirement. They had affordability at 35, cost, or the quality and cost of healthcare, at 21. They ranked well-being at 3. They ranked the weather at 3, and they ranked crime at 27. So that's how Bankrate ranked this for the state of Florida. Now, in my experience, being born and raised in Minnesota and having offices in both, Minnesota and Florida, it's not surprising why so many people in my experience choose to retire in a state like Florida, particularly if you compare that to Minnesota. So for example, Minnesota has an estate tax. Florida doesn't. So that means if the total value of your state is above a certain threshold in the state of Minnesota, you're going to be subject to the Minnesota estate tax, whereas Florida does not have an estate tax. If you retire in Minnesota, Minnesota is going to tax your IRA, your 401k, your pension, your Social Security. Well, Florida does not have a state income tax, so you're not going to, pay taxes on your retirement accounts as you draw them down in retirement. You don't have to shovel sunshine in the state of Florida. Or as my daughter, who is a senior in college in Florida, commented, some of her friends are like, yeah, but there's alligators there. She says, yeah, there's alligators here, but if I leave them alone, they leave me alone. And I don't have to chisel ice off of my car 6 months out of the year before I use it. So, there's a lot of reasons that you may consider, retiring from a place like Minnesota down to Florida, or may even consider being a Florida Snowbird. Now, if you're thinking of retiring here, or you're thinking about becoming a Florida Snowbird, there's also some legal considerations you should think about. Chief among them is, if you have an existing estate plan in place, you're probably going to want to update that as you come to Florida. So for example, if you just have a will in place, you're probably going to want to switch to a trust-based estate plan because you do not want to have to go through probate in Florida. Now, that's particularly the case if you, are a snowbird. So if you buy a home here in Florida, but maybe keep a home or a company up in Minnesota, then you're definitely going to want to have a trust. Otherwise, you're potentially looking at having to go through probate in both states to deal with the assets in each state when you pass away. It's also important that your estate plan be updated under Florida law. So Florida has some different requirements for trust, particularly vis-a-vis Florida Homestead. And here's another interesting little wrinkle you should be aware of, particularly if you're going to be a snowbird. We know one of the unofficial factors that the Revenue Department is going to look at in determining whether or not you are a Florida resident or, say, a Minnesota or Wisconsin resident for tax purposes is which state law are your planning docs set up under. So in other words, is your will or trust set up under Minnesota law, or is it set up under Florida law? If you set it up under Florida law, that's just one more factor in your favor, one more of the criteria that the state will look at in determining whether or not you are a Minnesota or a Florida resident for tax purposes. So again, not surprising, Florida, according to Bankrate.com, is in the top 10 states to retire in. A lot of good reasons for that, particularly, again, if you're coming from a state that has an estate tax or some of these higher taxes that you can avoid by moving down to Florida. Certainly hard to argue with the weather in January, and some things to consider from a legal standpoint if you are looking at making the change. Now, if you have any questions on this, we have the link in the description below. You can contact us. Also, I'm hosting a free online masterclass. We're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of wills and trusts, how you might select between them, some considerations for estate tax planning, how to actually protect the assets you leave for a spouse, how to protect the assets you leave for your children and grandchildren so that it's protected in the event they get sued, they get divorced, something happens. So there's a link for that masterclass in the description. And if you are interested in learning how you can protect your home and life savings from long-term care and nursing home costs, we've written a free consumer guide, Protect Our Home, and we will have a link for that in the description as well. So we hope you found this video helpful. We look forward to seeing you in an upcoming one. Be well.